All right, hello there, thrill seekers. This is take 3 of today's video. I was outside in the 90-some degree heat just making a video that I could see on the little counter thingy up there, on which I can see but you can't see, that I made a video 29 minutes long, and when I went back inside to edit it, there were 49 seconds of the video available to edit. And the second take of it was spoiled by Ziggy having a barking fit. So I'm going to do it again. And what I want to talk to you today about is ordination. I've talked about ordination on this video channel before. So for those of you old timers who watch all the videos, if there are such people who are crazy probably if they're watching every video, I hope I'm not going to bore you with repetition. But I'm still getting questions about this, which means some people aren't watching all those videos, so let's talk about it. So I'm going to launch into this by reading the question that I got from a guy. I've exchanged emails with this person, maybe 3 or 4 emails about the subject. He is apparently trying to ordain. I don't know, it sounds like he's in the US and he's trying to ordain through some kind of more standard sort of Buddhist organization, a Zen organization, and he's been asking me questions about it. So let me just start by reading the question, and that will then we'll get into how I can answer this. And remember, we're jumping into this at the end of a long email, and that this is the 3rd, at least, maybe 4th in a series of emails. He says, in your path, were you willing to do something institutional to achieve your goal, assuming you wanted ordination early on? Or did it just so happen that you found Nishijima Roshi's approach was more aligned with your interpretation of things as well? In my own path, I wasn't aware that there were teachers like you, and so I was on the traditional path because that's what I thought was the right way. Do you see your path being repeatable, and if so, how? And this is how I answered the question, and this is how we'll sort of launch into this subject. To your question, I never wanted to ordain. It wasn't a goal of mine or even an interest. It was only because Nishijima Roshi wanted to give me Dharma transmission that I did any of that stuff. So this is covered in, I think, several of my books, most notably in Hardcore Zen. So obviously, some people I think who watch these videos don't even know I write books. I write books. I've written 10 books on the subject of Zen, ranging from Hardcore Zen, Sit Down and Shut Up, Don't Be a Jerk, It Came from Beyond Zen, The Other Side of Nothing. That's 5. There's at least 5 more out there. So you can read those books to answer a lot of these questions, but I don't care. It doesn't matter. But anyway, I said that Nishijima Roshi said I needed to take the precepts as part of doing the Dharma transmission. Taking the precepts is sort of an ordination. People argue both ways about that, and I hope that I'm going to cover that subject in the rest of this video. But taking the precepts is when you make a public vow before your teacher and usually a group of students and maybe your family and whoever, and you agree to uphold the 16 Buddhist precepts. This is in the Zen form of Buddhism. In other forms of Buddhism, there are different numbers of precepts, but there's usually some kind of a standard thingy, a ceremony in which you publicly agree that you're going to follow these precepts for the rest of your life. Hi, this is Editor Brad jumping in here because I realized I'd forgotten to say something that I said in the first version of this video, which is that when you take the precepts or when you do Dharma transmission or any of these sorts of ordinations, there is paperwork involved and there's a public aspect to it. Dogen writes extensively about this in a chapter of Shobogenzo called Shisho, which means certificate of transmission. And he's talking specifically about the certificates that accompany Dharma transmission, but there are certificates also that accompany doing Jukai and doing other sort of ordination ceremonies. So there should be, there's a public acknowledgement that this has happened. So it happens in front of people. I think I said that in the video. And that there is paperwork that is given to you afterwards. Sometimes it's written on paper, sometimes it's written on parchment, sometimes it's written on a piece of silk, and there's other ways to do it. But there is something involved. And this is to kind of ensure the legitimacy of this. And people do fake this. Dogen writes extensively in that chapter called Shisho about different people who fake their Dharma transmission certificates and how to recognize a fake one. I encountered this myself. I encountered a guy a number of years ago who was a Scottish fellow living in the U.S. who claimed to be a teacher, a transmitted, Dharma transmitted teacher in a Rinzai lineage. And he talked a good talk, and he was a writer, and I recommended he talk to my editors at New World Library about his book. They liked his book, but they found that there were some questions about his whether he was telling the truth about being a Dharma heir in the tradition, an official Dharma heir, and I said, well, just ask him for the paperwork. He'll have paperwork that proves it. Well, what he sent them was, this is like 15 or so years ago probably, when cell phones weren't quite as good as they are now, and he sent them a cell phone photo of this really, really super fake looking document. I mean, it looked like he didn't even try to make it look real. Maybe he realized the jig was up and it wasn't worth putting a lot of effort into it, but it was terrible. So there should be a certification of some sort, and it should look a certain way, and there's a way to recognize the real ones and the fake ones. Okay, now back to Brad doing the video. In Nishijima Roshi's way of doing things, Jukai meaning taking the precepts, was the thing. In contemporary Zen organizations, there are different forms of Jukai. There's a thing called Shukei Tokudo and Zaikei Tokudo, I think is what they call it. And these are different sorts of ceremonies. The ceremonies themselves are more or less identical, but in the Shukei Tokudo, you are going to go and join a monastery, at least for a certain period of time, maybe not for your whole life. And in Zaikei Tokudo, you're not. You're just going to live in your own home or apartment or whatever. Nishijima Roshi didn't make a distinction between Shukei and Zaikei Tokudo. His feeling seemed to be that if Dogen wrote about it, that was legit, and if it came after Dogen's time, he ignored it. So this designation, this changing up of things is something that I think Shukei Tokudo did exist during Dogen's time. I know it did because he writes about it. I don't think Zaikei Tokudo was even a thing in his time. But it gets very mixed up. And anyway, the point is that Nishijima Roshi didn't require, or didn't actually make a distinction between those two. Let us continue. Then when I decided to move back to the US, I thought it might be useful to have an official Soto Shu ordination. But I got that through Nishijima Roshi, so I didn't have to follow the standard Soto Shu requirements. And in any case, it never mattered a bit that I had that Soto Shu ordination, and I never followed up on it, which means I think it lapsed. You have to do some kind of something within 10 years or the ordination lapses. Not only did I not do that thing, I never even bothered to find out what that thing was. Plus, you got to pay Soto Shu big money for any of that stuff that they do, and it's all just a performance anyway. So, in my own case, I had this Jukai ceremony, and I had the Dharma transmission ceremony, which is called Shiho, and then this certificate that you get just to complicate things and make it more confusing is called Shisho, which almost sounds the same. Anyway, so I did these two ceremonies, and then I decided to move back to the US, and I thought if I'm going to do anything Zen, I hadn't even decided. I was just going to go to the US to continue working for Tsuburaya Productions, the company I worked for in Japan. They wanted me to head up their Los Angeles office, which was a disaster, but that's a whole other story. But I thought if I did intend to do anything Zen-ish in America, then having an ordination that was recognized by Soto Shu might be useful. It turned out it wasn't useful at all. Hi, it's Editor Brad interrupting again, and I realize I think most people watching know what Soto Shu is, but I'll explain for those of you who don't. Soto Shu is a big sort of Vatican-like organization in Japan, which was established to sort of unify all the Soto Zen temples under one umbrella. Not every Soto temple in Japan belongs to Soto Shu. Most of the Soto temples outside of Japan do not belong to Soto Shu, but it's sort of like getting your ordination. So it isn't considered absolutely necessary to have your ordination confirmed by Soto Shu. Like, there are legitimate ordinations which are not done through Soto Shu, but having the Soto Shu ordination, I thought, might be useful, having their kind of, I don't know, their stamp of approval on it and being on their books. As I said, it turned out to be useless. Back to me. But the deal was with that, because Nishijima Roshi vouched for me, I didn't have to do any of the whatever the Soto Shu requires of people in order to get an a priest ordination through them. Ordination is a difficult word for me to say. So I didn't have to do that stuff. So let's talk a little bit about institutional ordination. This is what this guy has been asking me about. He wants to ordain within an institution. So there are institutions who provide ordinations, or let me just read you what I said, because I'll just read you what I said and then we'll talk about it. All institutional recognitions are ridiculous when you really look into them. This is especially true of religious institutions. It's a game and it's entirely phony. No institution can validate any sort of spiritual attainment, if there is such a thing. And I put spiritual attainment in quotes, and I'm probably going to use that phrase a few times in this video. But I want you to understand, I don't think spiritual attainment is such a stupid phrase, but I don't know how else to say it. There's a sort of mojo or something that a person has that can be recognized by somebody else who has that mojo. And we can just call that spiritual attainment, for want of a better term. Anyway, they can't validate any sort of spiritual attainment. They just give you a credential. Actually, in most cases, in every case I know of, they just allow you to purchase a credential. So that's how it goes. If you fulfill the requirements of the institution, then you are allowed by that institution to then buy from them a credential. And a credential is where they vouch for you and sort of say that this guy is legit. It means, so what does the credential mean? It means that the institution vouches for you, but all such institutions are corrupt, some more than others. So what does it mean to have a corrupt institution vouch for your spiritual attainment? And then to answer his other question, I said, I don't think my path is repeatable. No one's is. If you get lucky, you might find a rogue teacher who will do for you what Nishijima Roshi did for me and several other of his students, and he's not the only one who does this. There are others, but I don't know any. And for anybody who might be thinking of asking, yeah, that's it. I don't know who they are. I know they're out there. I know they exist, but I don't know how to find them. You just have to be lucky. So at its basis, what does ordination really mean? Well, in the Buddha's time, the way a person got ordained as a monk is that they would go to the Buddha and they would say, I want to be a monk. And if the Buddha felt like this person is going to be okay as a monk, he would say, welcome, monk. And that was an ordination. That's how it worked. There was no requirements. So that was just that's the way it was done. So an ordination kind of means that somebody vouches for you. And the best sort of example or simile, or I don't know what the word I'm looking for, that I can think of is there was Jimi Hendrix made an appearance on, I believe it was The Tonight Show, or it might have been some other talk show on American TV in the late 60s, and the host, who might have been Johnny Carson or it might have been somebody else, said to him, are there any sort of new up-and-coming guitarists who you think are good? And Jimi Hendrix said, oh yeah, there's this guy, Billy Gibbons. He plays with a band called the Moving Sidewalks. I think he's pretty good. So some of you may already know this, but Billy Gibbons went on to be the leader and the guitarist for ZZ Top, a big, mega platinum selling band. And the fact that he had been vouched for by Jimi Hendrix gave him some kind of legitimacy among, people were like, oh, this is the guy that Jimi Hendrix says is good. So maybe he's good. So that kind of helps him become legitimate. And in a sense, that's kind of what ordination is. Ordination is somebody says you're good. And I'm talking about two levels of ordination. So in Nishijima Roshi's way of doing things, there were only two kinds of ordination. And I put that in scare quotes because I don't know if the word ordination really fits, but I'm just going to use it. There was Jukai, which is when you take the precepts, and basically anybody could take the precepts. Anybody who said, hey, Nishijima Roshi, I want to take the precepts from you, he'd give him the precepts. And that made you, in Nishijima Roshi's estimate, a monk. Whether you decided to join a monastery or not afterwards was up to you. He still considered his people who taken Jukai to be monks. Other institutions would not agree with that, but that's how he did it. Then the other sort of ordination he did was Shiho, which is Dharma transmission. And in Dharma transmission, that is when you became a full independent teacher on your own right. You no longer had to, you're no longer a student. I mean, you could be a student in some sense, but you're no longer sort of beholden to anybody else. You just kind of go and teach on your own if you want. And he did that for, I don't know, 20 odd students of his, I think. He gave them that Shiho. If you look up Dharma transmission on Wikipedia, it will tell you that Dharma transmission is a low-level sort of, I don't know if they use the word ordination, but I'll use the word ordination. It's a low-level sort of ordination that doesn't really mean anything, and Americans make way too much about it. They don't say exactly like that, but that's definitely the implication there. And that there's a whole bunch of other steps to go through to make your Dharma transmission a real full Dharma transmission or something. And they enumerate the steps. And I just had a quick look at it before I made this video, and it was dizzying to me. Because I don't know anything about this stuff. I know a little about this stuff, but not much. Nishijima Roshi's way of doing things was based on what Dogen talks about. And when Dogen talks about Dharma transmission, in his own case, he got Dharma transmission from Tendo Nyojo in China, and that was it. And he left China, and in those days there was no internet, no telephones. The postal service, such as it was totally unreliable. So at the point that Dogen left China, he was effectively cut off forever from Tendo Nyojo. As far as I know, they never communicated again. And so that was fine. That was just how it was done. So Dogen doesn't talk about there being a 3-year period of training and blah, blah, blah. If you look at Wikipedia, it goes into all this stuff that is supposed to happen after Dharma transmission. Dogen doesn't talk about any of that stuff, and Nishijima Roshi didn't either. So that's just Dharma transmission is just that's it. Then you're done. If you become part of an institution, what institutions do is they try to standardize things. And the thing I think of when I think about what institutions do is like what McDonald's does. So if you want to become a McDonald's franchise holder, the McDonald's Corporation is going to oversee you to a certain extent and make sure that you make the Big Mac in the right way and you make the Quarter Pounder or the Royale with cheese or whatever it is in a certain way, and that you don't deviate from that. But there's plenty of other burger places. There's In-N-Out Burger, there's Carl's Jr., there's Burger King, there's Tommy's, which is a kind of a chain around here. So there's all kinds of other burger places, and they all have their own way of doing things. Same thing with institutions, but they're trying to standardize something. And if you want to standardize a hamburger, I think you can probably do it. But if you want to standardize spiritual attainment, good luck, because it's impossible. You can't do it. But they try to do it by having certain requirements that one must meet. And judging by the emails that I've gotten from this guy, I'm guessing, although I don't think he said it explicitly, that he is looking at the Soto Zen Buddhist Association's requirements. So there's 2 organizations that I know of in America that are sort of involved in Zen Buddhism. And as I say all the time, there's a bunch of different kinds of Buddhisms. Don't think there's just one. And there's a bunch of different kinds of Zen Buddhism. But these organizations have established certain prerequisites that you have to fulfill in order for them to consider you to be a teacher. Or I mean, there's all sorts of levels of teacher. There's Oshos and there's Dai Oshos and there's all this stuff. Like I said, Nishijima Roshi never bothered with any of this stuff, but they have their requirements. And they, for example, I looked at them years ago, and it's been so long since I looked at them, I can't remember the specifics, but I do remember there was a certain number of hours of Ango, for example. And an Ango is a retreat, a meditation intensive retreat where you basically do nothing but zazen. Of course, you do other things, but you're really, really devoting yourself to zazen for a period of usually 90 days, although I've heard of 30-day angos being done. And they, the SZBA, Soto Zen Buddhist Association of America, tries to standardize things by saying that a person who's going to be considered by a teacher by them has to do a certain number of hours of ango at an approved training place, and they do this and that. And so, having these requirements, I mean, it's kind of similar to how the Catholic, I assume, there's a thing called a seminary. I don't know much about seminaries, but you have to go to a certain kind of school and have a certain amount of education and be able to pass certain tests in order to become a Catholic priest, right? And then the Catholic Church vouches for you. But like I say about corrupt institutions, there's been a lot of talk about how corrupt the Catholic Church is. So how much value is there in saying you've been certified by this organization that seems to certify people who are kind of shady? There you go. That's the problem with all of this. The other problem is the idea that fulfilling all of these requirements, for example, the number of hours of ango you have to sit or the different ceremonies one has to go through, doesn't guarantee you're necessarily going to have any sort of, again, that dirty phrase, spiritual attainment. You could go. It makes it more likely, I would say, but it doesn't make it a certain thing. And there are people who don't go through any of that, who have kind of kind of an awakening experience, and even the Buddhist literature of from down through the ages, acknowledges that. They call them pratyeka Buddhas, and it's a person who's a self-enlightened person, and it's a person who just kind of has an experience of awakening on their own. A contemporary example outside of the Buddhist tradition would be Ramana Maharshi, who's a Hindu teacher. I think he died in the 1950s, but he had his awakening experience, I believe, as a child, and it just sort of came on him spontaneously, and he didn't even know what it was. Another example of that, and maybe somebody, if they're watching, who knows who this is, because I don't know who this is, I just remember hearing this story a few times, was an Englishman during World War II, and his city is being attacked by the Germans, and he looks up in the air, and here comes a Luftwaffe bomber, and it drops a bomb, and he can see that it's going to hit near him, and there's no way he can outrun the blast zone of this bomb. So he's like, okay, I'm about to die. Bomb hits the ground, and it doesn't go off. Sometimes they were just duds. They just didn't work. And at that moment, he had a very profound and deep awakening experience, but he didn't know what it was. He was an Englishman in the 1940s. How is he going to have any? He probably had no experience at all of what this phenomenon could be. And later on in life, he found a Zen teacher who kind of worked with him, and he became a Zen teacher himself, I believe. So there is this kind of spontaneous sort of attainment which comes unbidden and outside of any of that framework. The only thing that framework does, or those kind of, 150 hours per year of ango or whatever, I don't know how many hours they require, but some number of hours. The only thing that would do would be to kind of make it more likely. So Dogen would probably tell us, because he tells us this often, that awakening is there all the time. So you are fully, completely Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. That's the Sanskrit-derived term for unsurpassed, profound, complete enlightenment is going on for you right now, right as you watch this video. The only thing is probably most of the people watching this video haven't cleared away the mental chatter and stuff enough to notice that. So the only thing that these required, there goes Ziggy, 150 million hours or whatever the hell it is of ango, of sitting practice, would do is just to make it more likely that you've cleared away enough of that dross for it to happen. But who knows? So it doesn't guarantee anything. And I often wonder why people even want to be ordained. As I said, I didn't want to be ordained, but I do remember a sort of brief flirtation, mental flirtation with ordination that I had early on in my practice when I was probably 20 or 21 years old or a young kid. And sort of looking at it like I want to be ordained because at that time I thought, oh, I could have that life. I could go join a monastery and live that life, and I sort of thought of it as kind of a career. But the fact is, nobody's hiring for that. So forget it. It's not a career move. You have to do it because you really want to invest in it, and if you enter a monastic community, are going to have to be one of the people that makes that monastic community run, and you're going to have to put a lot of work into it. So this idea that I had as a youngster, that I think a lot of people have, that you're going to go off and have an easy life in the monastery and be taken care of. No, it's not going to happen. So forget about it. It's not going to happen. So there you go. I think I said most of the things that I said in the first version of this video, but I don't know because that first version is gone into the ether. But if you want to support me making more of these videos, you can go to the URL, or not the URL, you can go to the description section that's below this video if you're looking at it on YouTube. And it will have links to my PayPal and my Patreon accounts, and I hope they are the right links. Sometimes those links go bad after a time. So if you want to avoid going to the bad links, you can go to the URL that I'm putting on the screen right now, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. And there you will also find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts, and those are my main ways of making a living. So I appreciate your support. But as always, you don't got to support me if you don't want to support me. We will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. And one thing that did come out of my previous video was the cameo that I made for Ziggy, so I'm going to put that in. So you're going to see an outdoor cameo from Ziggy, even though it's been an indoor video from me. Sorry. Anyway, we'll see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Hey Ziggy, do you want to get enlightened? Do you want to get ordained? I hereby ordain you cutest dog in the world. You are ordained by me as the cutest dog in the world. Do you agree? All right. Well, you're ordained now. See you later, Ziggy.